All right. Hey, Jay. How are
Paul,
you?
what's going on?
Yeah, not too much. Back again. Fancy meeting you here for
Yeah.
another episode of Teacher Talk with Paul and Jay. It's good to be back with you. It's good to have listeners out there listening to the show. We're making our way through the Odyssey. Great little book to teach. And if you've been teaching the Odyssey or thinking about teaching the Odyssey, take a look at our videos on this and on our discussions of each book. We try to
Mhm.
walk through them carefully, giving an overview, and then also pulling out what stands out in each chapter. And hopefully, those are the kinds of things that you can use as a guide, as little flags in the sand as you make your way through this winding book full of, as
Oh,
we've said many times,
twists and
everything.
turns.
It's what?
Twists and turns.
Twists and turns.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Full of twists and turns. Well, before we jump in to book seven, to book seven's Gardens and Firelight, as it's titled in the translation I'm using, which is the Robert Fitzgerald translation, we need a poem. Jay.
Yeah, I was thinking I teach Pride and Prejudice every year to my seniors, and it's become one of my favorite times of year. Pride and
Oh,
Prejudice has two of the cringiest proposal scenes in the history of literature. We have a whole
really?
class. Oh, all of my awkward teenage boys take such delight in seeing adult men be awkward. And we have a whole class that centers on which proposal is cringier. And we have
Okay.
fights. There's
Okay.
arguments and almost fisticuffs.
This is
Well,
great.
in this chapter, we don't have a proposal scene. We have a father incredibly abruptly offering his daughter to a grizzled stranger.
That
So
is correct.
which, as fathers of daughters, I would just like to say this is not how Paul and I roll. But anyway,
No.
well, but then again, Paul, Odysseus has not washed up on a nearby beach. Who knows how appealing he would be, but I
Yeah,
like
that's true. Apparently, he's an overwhelming guy, and you know that.
overwhelmed. I mean, his name's on the cover, basically.
Yeah, yeah, he's got a
So
whole book.
he
Well,
has
it's
a
true.
whole
It
book.
might be different. It is wild. That is a wild scene. I remember the scene you're talking
Yeah,
about.
it's cuckoo. So, and very abrupt. Like it comes
Hmm.
sort of out of nowhere. But anyway, um, there's this poem by a man named Richard Jones who has a book called, if I remember correctly, um, The Correct Spelling and Exact Meaning. And the poem is simply called The Apple. And I really like it. And not just because I'm a father of a daughter, I just really like how this poem's built. So
Okay.
this is The Apple by Richard Jones. I pare an apple for my little girl, stunning as usual in a shimmering Cinderella gown. I cut 7 shining crescent moons to array and serve on a deep blue plate and recall the skill needed to cut and remove the hide of a white-tailed deer. Before Sarah was born, before
Mhm.
I imagined her in my life or how life would change, I met in rural Wisconsin an insurance adjuster. His hobby was taxidermy, headless carcasses waiting to be skinned and butchered, hung from pulley ropes in the trees. I visited the taxidermist with my carpenter friend. We borrowed a pulley and winch to hoist a plate glass window to the second story of an old house we were renovating. It was brilliant, sparkling autumn, deer season. Gunshots and church bells rang in the distance. What I recall most vividly is the teenage girl who lived in the house next door to the taxidermist. Barefoot in a sunlit Sunday dress, maple leaves swirling on the lawn, she danced, pale and long limbed, practicing baton twirls, throwing the metal bar high in the air, catching it with a curtsy. Enchanted, I steadied myself against my friend's truck, watching the silver baton spinning crosses in the air. I remember that as if it were yesterday. That and the cold stare the girl's father gave me as he stood on the porch, knife in hand, paring an apple. Right?
The Apple by
By
Richard
Richard.
Jones.
Yeah. You got to love the
Well,
full circleness. You got to love
why
that.
did you choose that poem, Jay?
because this guy, whoever this nameless guy is
Yeah.
the complete bipolar opposite of Alcinous, who's just handing his 15-year-old or however old daughter to this stranger. So
Oh my gosh.
it's my favorite father-daughter poem. Maybe that says something about me.
That is a wonderful poem. That is a wonderful poem. It has
Yeah,
so much in it.
I love it.
I love that.
Yeah,
Uh,
I knew
and I
you
love
would.
he's opening up, paring an apple for his own daughter and
Yep.
thinking back. And now it's different. Now the shoe's on the other foot. He has his own
Yeah,
daughter.
love it.
And the fullness of life experience in that too. This taxidermy and
Right.
carpentry and renovation and
Yeah.
and dressing a deer, prepping a deer.
Yep.
It's that's amazing. All
I
right,
thought I've been itching to read that on the podcast. So
this is perfect.
yeah.
So Nausicaa is the girl with the baton twirling in the air in her
Yeah, that's
father's
right.
palace. Yeah,
That's right.
you can kind of picture that. Yeah,
Oh man. So we usually start these conversations with a little summary. We're at a weird stage in the epic, right? The most
yeah,
famous parts of the epic kind of haven't happened yet. There's a lot of setup kind of feeling, but I think, and you and I have talked about this, a reason to teach this entire poem is these chapters that are so easy to skim over. You and I have said for years, anytime you're reading a great book and you're tempted to skim, go slower.
yeah,
There is
yeah.
meat here. And
Yes,
so
yeah,
we'll summarize it quickly, and then Paul and I will share a moment we think is really
yeah.
important, and then a surprising moment, and then maybe sort of a lingering question we have. But I'm actually
Well,
really interested in a lot of stuff in book 7.
Well, I know, and it's weird. And it's how it feels to me is like in those movies that you watch that end up not being really good movies because the director and whoever else have not paid attention to the details.
Mm,
They didn't really quite get the clothing right. They didn't really work on the language, making sure it was dated
yep.
correctly. They didn't shoot it exactly right, and they didn't pay a lot of money for the music. Those little things were the cutting corners. That's what skipping chapters like this feels like to me.
Yes.
Because you look at it and you're like, all right, look, we shot the movie, we got the plot, we got the actors, everything
Right.
happens.
Right.
What else do you need? I don't
Right.
know. The audience doesn't believe it. You're not going to be
Yep.
drawn into the magic or the mystery of it.
Yeah.
And this, to some degree, I think there's more here than that, but there is at least that. This is the
Yep.
sharp edges. This is the Coen Brothers style movie shooting where no
Yeah.
detail is too small
Yep.
to get correct.
Yeah. That's
And
fair.
so it feels kind of like that. But yeah, open it up, Jay. What happens here in short?
So a couple of things. So
Mhm.
since the Trojan War, by several counts that I've read, Odysseus, this is the 14th place he's landed. So when we think of Odysseus's development as a character, and we think of Tennyson's great line from the poem Ulysses, I am a part of all that I have met. Well, he's met an incredibly eclectic group of natural and supernatural and monstrous characters. The other thing is this chapter is largely about the community he's about to entrust his story to, a king and a queen and a princess and a people. So I'll talk about this in my obvious point, but anytime we enter a new space, a new workplace, a new neighborhood, a new country, maybe, we kind of have to read like, okay, how much of me can I be here? How do conversations move? So I think those are important conversations to have with a reading group or a class, But anyway, after book 6, book 7 opens. Nausicaa returns home. Odysseus walks into town with Athena, who's in disguise as a little girl, and Athena hides Odysseus in mist. And it's really important to remember that we know that mist is often used in the Iliad when gods want to protect mortals. So mist is a little clue. I'm going to talk about that a little later, but Athena gives him instructions, and Odysseus approaches the queen, Arete. The mist is lifted. Now, I always say to students, imagine you're just like hanging out having dinner, and a random dude just appears. That's what happens. You probably remember like Super Friends, Saturday morning cartoons, and you had like Wonder Woman's invisible plane that you could see the outline of, and it wasn't invisible, but that's a deep cut. I'm appealing to like a very narrow demographic with that illusion, but
I do remember that, and the her little sparkling lasso rope,
yeah,
on her waist belt. Yeah,
yeah. So he supplicates, he grabs her ankles, begs, her mercy and everything.
yeah,
Alcinous offers some food and wine, and even though Odysseus really just on paper would be that this would be horrifying. Like if you're just a random group of people chilling, and all of a sudden this guy appears, like a mist is lifted, and this dude is there. Despite that, Arete the queen is calm, just like Nausicaa was on the beach. Actually, maybe that's where she gets it.
mm.
Notices that Odysseus is wearing clothes that she herself has made. So Odysseus kind of talks his way out of that. Odysseus is given a meal and a comfortable place to stay the night. I mean, that's like a super superficial sketch of book 7, but it's largely about this person who's sort of magically guided. He appears, and it's about the context in which he finds himself.
Yeah. Okay. And that's the bulk of the plot, of like the things that happen. So there's not a ton there, right? Overall.
Right.
Okay.
I would say.
All right. But that being said, the setting for this is outstanding. There's something over the top about the setting, which is, I want to end with my final question um, is about this place that seems almost too perfect, utopian like place that he's landed. So maybe we'll pick that up. We'll pick that up at the end. But I'd like to open up with maybe the most important quote, or key quote, key place in this story, and
Yeah.
I think it does have to do with Arete, however you say her name, um, which is the Greek word for excellence,
Yeah.
virtue, right? She's excellent at all things, excellence in character. Um, and it's in that scene, and where she first speaks, I think, where she first speaks to Odysseus in the Fitzgerald translations. It's on page 118. It's line 255, where the great tactician carefully replied. So here's a key moment in the plot, and it's almost funny in a way. It'd be fun to film this. Speaking of movies, after Odysseus throws himself at her feet, makes supplication to her, and the king talks. Uh, Arete looks at Odysseus and says, "Friend, I for one have certain questions for you.
Yeah.
Who are you, and who has given you this clothing? Did you not say that you wandered here by sea?"
Mm-hmm.
In the lines before that, the narrator tells us that the ivory-skinned lady, that's Arete, I guess the woman, I always took that to mean, and this is something I haven't looked up, but I took that to mean the people who are wealthy enough to be able to stay inside. I think
Exactly
if
right.
you stay outside in the sun working,
Yeah.
your skin is not it's not ivory skin. It's
Absolutely.
dirty. It's burned by the sun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the ivory skinned lady turned to him, for she knew his cloak and tunic to be her own work. So Arete looks at this man who says he washed the floor, and she says to him, "Hey, where'd you get that really nice tunic at?" So she knows there's some kind of story there, and this is a key moment for Odysseus, because everything turns on his response,
Right.
on the cleverness of his response, and the great tactician carefully replied, and then he replies and speaks. But I think this is sort of a key moment in the story, where we see the generosity of Nausicaa's mother, to not come out and make any accusations, no hasty accusations, even though she sees a stranger walking around in her clothing, curious. Also, we begin to see again how Odysseus is a great tactician, how he is skilled in all ways of contending. It's not just sword fight, it's not just pugilistic, it's also being able to explain what he's doing in the queen's clothing,
Mm-hmm.
which super awkward, could have been disastrous. And he didn't. And if he didn't pull this off nicely, he might not have gotten a ride home, and he may have gotten a lot worse. So I sort of like this moment in this chapter. It's a key moment to think about. you get a good picture of where a person like Nausicaa comes from. Listen to
Yeah.
her mother.
Yeah.
And then you get a good sense of some of what's distinctive and capable about Odysseus.
I
Yeah,
like.
so I like that moment.
Yeah. I
What
like.
yeah what do you like as kind of an important moment in this chapter, Jay?
Well, I'm going to cheat and say that I'm going to notice a tension between two things.
Okay. Okay.
No, I just find that the heartbeat of this. There's a really great. I'm going to just digress for a moment.
Mm,
Paul, if you need, and anybody else listening,
yeah.
if you love the arts, if you love great literature, if you love theater, there's a series called Playing Shakespeare. And
Okay.
it's from the late 70s, early 80s. And it's the Royal Shakespeare Company, directed by its founder, John Barton. And it's a series of like 50-minute Shakespeare workshops. The Royal Shakespeare Company at the time had no names like Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, Judi Dench, like Michael Cunningham, like
Barely getting by on the
barely
town.
getting there. It's
Yeah.
breathtaking. So you'll have like they'll workshop just a speech and a scene, and but there's a moment where, and I forget which actor it is. It may have been Patrick Stewart asking, "My character is thinking this, but also thinking this. Which one should I play?" And John Barton, the director, says, "Play the tension." Shakespeare
Mm,
never gives you an easy out. Play the tension. And I think the tension in book 7 is fascinating to me. And the tension is what it's like being Odysseus at this place that has both amazing harmony and also it's a place of clear and present danger for Odysseus, as you just alluded to in your
yes.
reflection. He says the wrong thing. He's dead, Paul. Let's be clear,
Yeah. Right.
right? They don't have to be nice to him. They're not reading. I always have to remind the students, like, these people aren't reading the Odyssey. He's just a person, you know?
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
just a
Yeah.
stranger. So here,
Who they seem to have heard of, we'll find out later, but they don't know him. They don't know who he is now. That's for sure.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
100%. I'm not going
Mm,
to read a lot, but
yeah.
um, what's interesting is so here are some moments that this chapter takes great pains to show the harmony in Phaeacia, in Sharia, where the Phaeacians live.
Yes. Yes.
So um, we have Alcinous, whose name means mighty mind,
Right.
and Arete, whose name is excellence. So, like, the name of the king and queen suggests you couldn't do better than this community. And
Right.
then the stability and wealth of the kingdom is made clear by such details as the silver and golden dogs, the statues outside the
Yes.
kingdom, were
Yes.
created by Hephaestus himself, the great smith of the gods.
Yes.
Um, the king also has 50 slaves, which is a sign of wealth and
Mm-hmm.
stability, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Mm-hmm.
also a passage really reflecting on like the natural environment and the fecundity and the productivity of like the olive trees and the fruit.
Oh, right.
um, there's extreme xenia or hospitality. So there's a
Yeah.
moment on line 170 in my translation. This is short. Alcinous reached for Odysseus's hand and raised the many-minded hero from the ashes. He
Yeah.
made Laodamas, his favorite son, vacate his chair so he could sit beside
Yeah.
him.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how my son would take this, but this is in effect, at least figuratively, adopting a man he met minutes ago. It
Yes.
reminds
Right.
me, and there's a few things in this chapter that remind me of Beowulf. There's no sign that the authors of Beowulf had access to stuff like the Odyssey, but maybe there's
Right.
something innately human in a story like this, that
Yeah.
Hrothgar adopts Beowulf as his own son, if you remember.
That's
And
right.
that happens here. So it isn't simply, I'm going to give you a sandwich and send you on your way. That kind of hospitality, it's extreme xenia.
Mm,
Alcinous plans a banquet. Alcinous acknowledges the power of the gods with hecatombs, the sacrifice of 100
that's
bulls,
right.
and also the power of the fates as a power that even transcends the god. He acknowledges that. And
Yeah, that's
then
right.
on line 323, these are all little tiny things. I don't want to go on and on, but he's
No, this is good.
this connects to our poem. The king replied to Odysseus, "My heart is not the type to feel anger for no reason. Moderation is
Mm,
always best." And then he does this: "Athena, Zeus, Apollo, what a congenial man you are. I wish you would stay here and marry my own daughter and be my son. I'd give you a home and wealth if you would like to stay." Everywhere
yeah.
Odysseus, it matters that this is a paradisal environment. It matters that
Mm,
Ogygia and Aea are Edenic environments. And it matters
Mm.
that there's women there that love him and want to be with him, because all of these are extremely real temptations to potentially obstruct him for his main mission, which is to get home.
Yes.
If they were
Yes.
neutral environments, if they were like, Peabody, Massachusetts, where I live, which is nice, but it's not these places, not super tempting. There's good Greek food here, so maybe he'd be tempted. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, here and there. Yeah, I've
Here and
got
there.
that line. That's a great passage. I've got if you're in the Fitzgerald translation, it's lines 330 and following.
Yeah.
And it's shocking. It comes out of nowhere. And I thought I don't know exactly how to read it. But the lines that he says, "My daughter should be yours, and you should be my son-in-law." He says,
Yeah.
"Since we're of the same mind." And so I don't
Yeah.
know which he's more interested in, just having him
Right.
there as his own son-in-law, or
Yeah.
giving his daughter to him. Maybe it's just to have his a like-minded friend there.
Yeah.
Cool.
So there's one more moment of harmony before I get
Yeah.
to a couple of moments of sort of danger. And it's the end of the chapter. Dickens does this as well. You have like this amazing kaleidoscopic chapter in novels like Our Mutual Friend and Bleak House. But
Yeah.
then there's a chapter of Bleak House that ends with a boy going into a street, and it refers to that as the character's name is Joe, and he goes into a London street like a dewdrop in the ocean.
Oh.
Which, I mean, it's Dickens. You get those moments where like no one else can write sentences like that. Well, here you have this beautiful domestic moment. You might remember we talked about book one, which literally was in Mount Olympus and Earth and different places, but it ends with what? Telemachus getting tucked in. He's big
Yeah.
on these small, intimate endings.
Mm. Mm.
So here it's Odysseus was glad to go to sleep after his long adventures on that bed, surrounded by the rustling of the porch. Alcinous was sleeping in his room beside his wife, who made their bed and shared it, implying
Yeah.
some women don't do that in the Odyssey, which we know is true.
Mm.
So
Mm.
we have all these moments of harmony, which should lead us to believe, well, what's the problem? Why do we care? What's the conflict? Because here's moments
Right.
of danger. The island is genetically linked to Odysseus's supernatural enemy, Poseidon. Alcinous is Poseidon's grandson.
Right.
So you can't get more eggshelly than that. Odysseus is a grizzled war veteran who's probably in his 40s,
Mm.
in a strange land. That's inherently dangerous. There is no guarantee he's going to be cared for or will survive the day if he says or does the wrong thing in the wrong moment. This is
Right.
why Athena has to cover him in mist, because there's no way he'd be able to wander into the palace and get to the next step. There's no way.
Right.
A couple
Right.
of more. Odysseus needs Athena's list of suggestions and the mist to survive, as I just said. And then I just discovered this because I knew that Arete meant excellence. And then I looked up
Yes.
Alcinous's name, meaning great mind. You know what Nausicaa's name means? And I just looked this up. Burner of ships. So I would love people's thoughts on the podcast. I would love
All
people's
right.
thoughts in the comments here.
That's
But
amazing. I never looked that up. Burner of ships.
yeah, I'm fascinated by what the names mean in the Odyssey because they're almost
Wow.
always allegorical. And
Wow.
I find it really interesting because women, if you think of Circe, Calypso, and Nausicaa,
Yeah.
I think they all have real feelings for him, but their danger is that they provide potential obstacles for him reuniting with his homeland and his wife and his son. And I
That's a
think the
good.
name Burner of Ships is an incredibly suggestive name. That's how dangerous she is. If he stays with her, isn't it? Tell me if this is a stretch.
Yeah.
She's
Yeah.
essentially destroying his capacity to get home.
I guess. I mean, I did not know that at all. I never looked her name up, and never would have guessed that it was something like that. That's not a bad read, but it's an Odysseus centric read. Obviously she was named by her parents before Odysseus comes around.
Yeah.
Why would people who are named, the chapter tells us the men are known for shipbuilding and their excellence in sailing ships or moving them across the water.
Yeah.
Women are, I mean, that's their thing, is that
Right.
their port and their ships moving things across the seas wide back.
It's how he
Why
gets
is
home so fast later.
Yeah, fast and effortlessly. Why is Nausicaa the burner of ships?
Well, I wonder, and this might be getting too much in the weeds. I've never had this conversation, so I appreciate it.
Hmm.
Homer names her. Now I know
Yeah.
that's cheating. That's cheating, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
want to think that the parents are looking down and go, "Oh, she looks like a burner of ships. Let's call her that." You know,
She's going to ruin our lives.
she's gonna light some stuff on fire. This one, we have to name her. Um, but I just found that really interesting. So anyway, I mention all this because what's interesting to me about book 7 is
Yeah.
I think, and you're not doing this, but I think we could easily get trapped in these
Hmm.
Edenic, beautiful, intoxicating environments
Yes.
where here it isn't simply there's like wine and food. It's not a nice king and queen who want to take you into their house. It's a beautiful girl who, by the way, is like strong enough to not be scared by you,
Yeah.
who wants to
Yeah.
be with you, and her father wants you to be with her.
Hmm.
Um, that's incredibly dangerous. And then all the other like Poseidon related dangers and the stranger danger and all that stuff. So it's a fascinating chapter in terms of tension, I think.
It's dangerous. You keep saying dangerous. I think I know what you mean, but what do you mean?
Well,
Why do you
what
say
I mean
dangerous?
is like Xenia is I feel like the Iliad is a poem really centered on Kleos or glory and war heroism. And I
Yeah.
think this poem is largely about survival of an immigrant stranger, you know, person who lands in literally 14 different places.
Yeah.
Um, and the ethic of the time from Zeus was you if a stranger shows up before you even ask who he is, you have to feed him,
Right.
bathe him, and let him sleep the night because he might be a god in disguise. I mean, so uh, the thing about Xenia is there's no guarantee of it being given to you. So it's inherently dangerous. And we know this from Romeo and Juliet. When you get banished, that's a
Yeah.
fate worse than death. Well, it's no different here, frankly. You know,
Right.
none of
Right.
your people are there.
Hmm. And it's a danger for Odysseus because he what I mean one he miss if you misread the hospitality, it's meant to be hospitality. How much do they I don't know, how much does do they mean it? Do they mean for him to stay? It's an expression of hospitality,
Mm,
but I don't think you're necessarily supposed to stay. I don't know, you can misread it.
yeah,
I would take in the bigger plot though that the danger for Odysseus is that he gets off mission, he
yeah, yeah.
forgets,
That's
which
fair.
is which is what Calypso wanted him to do, to forget
Right.
home and wife, forget Penelope, forget
Yeah.
mortality, and stay with me. So it's a danger in that sense, in that Odysseus loses himself. He
Hmm.
loses his identity. He loses his
Right.
whole world, his whole being, everything he is, which is what's precious in this story, really.
Right. I
So,
think
so I think danger is the right word in that sense. Yeah,
no, I think it's three things. I think it's exactly what you're saying. I think it's the possibility that any people you come across might not give you hospitality just because
that's
they're human
right.
beings.
Yeah,
But it's also the Poseidon link that once Odysseus starts telling his story, if he tells the whole thing, they're
yeah,
going to know that his mortal enemy is the god that they're related to. So then
yeah,
what? So then what?
yeah.
Um,
Which, yeah, I don't know. They do find out, right?
oh,
And
yeah. I mean, not to spoil it, but yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's a funny part of this chapter. I would put it up there with just now finding out that Nausicaa's name means shipbuilder. I don't know why Odysseus finally gets his ride home from direct descendants of
Right.
Poseidon, people who they say we're no further from the gods than the
Right.
Cyclops are.
Right.
Um,
Well, it
so I
might be
don't.
the case. I mean, I'm totally guessing here, Paul, but Xenia is the virtue valued most by Zeus. Their names are connected.
Yeah,
Zeus trumps
yeah.
Poseidon.
It may be. Yeah,
I
it
bet that's
may.
a total guess. I would love people's thoughts on this. Like,
Yeah, it would be helpful.
because,
People,
and not
yeah,
that
who,
there's, and I'm sure scholars disagree. So it's not like we're going to come to some sort of
yeah,
mathematical certainty, but
no, no, no,
it's
no.
really interesting. Um, the insecurity. I'm just thinking of like, and the Emily Wilson translation brings this out in really fresh ways later on. We did book 13 in class today. Um,
Okay,
any,
yeah,
I have some students whose parents came to the country in the last 10 or 15 years.
yeah,
I have students it was 200 years ago, but I don't know if you're landing in a new country, you're asking some questions and that they're not
right,
all comfortable,
right, right.
you know? So I think this book kind of hints at some of the things that Odysseus is going to be wondering about later, but
Yeah,
anyway, that's I'm going on and on, but that
no, no,
tension
no.
is the tension between the overt, like, Edenic qualities of that country and the
Yeah,
danger of being a new person there and being
yeah,
Odysseus there. It's
yes,
really interesting to me, and I think it makes, you and I have talked about this, it makes chapters that you skip over, like book 7, chapters you shouldn't skip over.
Yeah, it's true. Because the theme gets hit and re-hit. The character of the person gets built out in these small interactions, and
Yeah.
it's it's the details, and the details are what make the difference between a strong anything
Yeah.
and something that's weak. Which I think I tell my students this all the time in various ways. Pay attention. Pay
Yeah.
attention. You can say it at every point, whatever you're doing. If you pay a little bit more close attention, you will find more there. Pay
Mhm.
attention. The most valuable thing. That's what everybody on the internet is trying to steal from us.
Yeah,
It's what they're
yeah.
monetizing. They make billion-dollar companies out of our attention, and it's
Mhm.
true. It's worth an enormous amount, and it's key to learning and breaking through. So paying attention in a chapter like this gives back. And that's part of what I think you and I, Jay, mean about a great book is that if you pay attention to it, and if you're in a room with 15, 20 students and you all pay attention to it, it
Mhm.
still gives back. It
Yeah.
doesn't break under the weight of all that intellectual firepower.
Mhm.
And that's, and I think that's what's going on here. All right, I like that. I like that. There is serious tension for things to go off the rails. Odysseus could be put to death for stealing, the queen's clothing, I guess, or whatever.
Mhm.
Or he could be drawn in by a king and his daughter Nausicaa, who are great people.
Mhm.
They're literally, and that is their name. Um, and pulled off his mission. Um, Surprising. Are we ready for a surprising quote? Are we
Yeah.
up to that?
Yeah.
Um, I got a small one. It's almost a joke, actually. I think it's kind of a funny little moment in this, um, and it's back at the same place where my key quote was when the great tactician carefully replies to Arete to tell her to answer her question. Tell me again how you got here and where'd you get that clothing? He says, "Ah, Majesty, what labor it would be to go through the whole story!" Exclamation point. Um, yeah, that would be a lot of work. And but he says, but I can tell you the whole story here really quickly. And that's what he does in this chapter. And then in books 8 through 13, he gives the laborious retelling of the whole tale.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a funny line, I guess, but it's a way of sort of marking the flow of the flow of the story. Here he says, "Oh, that would be a great amount of work to go into detail." Well, in the next book, he's going to start going
Yep.
into that detail and tell the whole story.
Mhm.
But you do get this. Also reminds me of Beowulf. This almost like serpentine story telling narrative pattern where the stories just they keep circling back around the story, and it almost moves in like these loops where the story moves forward, but they repeat. They go back and retell what
Mhm.
happened, and in each retelling, you sometimes get more details, or you get a little bit different angle or
Mhm.
color on it. And so in this short retelling, which is a brief summary of what he's going to go into in greater detail in the next books, we do find out how long. So if you want to make a timeline of Odysseus' return trip, how long he was on Ogygia with Calypso. It's laid out here. How long he was in the ocean afterwards. It's sort of laid out here as well. But I don't know. It's sort of a funny little line. It's like, oh yeah,
Mm.
I'd tell you, but that would take too long. You wouldn't want to hear that. And then,
No,
but
please
hang
don't
on.
make me tell my
Yeah,
story for 100 pages.
yeah.
No.
Actually, okay, I'll tell you. Okay, I'll tell you.
I triple dog dare you. Um,
Yeah.
I guess mine isn't anything to write home about. I just am fascinated by, uh, and this is sort of if you're ever teaching or leading a reading group, a default question when you're stuck is who are you believing and why? Just like in real
Okay.
life, you don't believe like Paul knows if I'm talking about books or if Paul's talking about books,
Yeah.
we really like books and we read them a lot and talk about them. So not that we're experts, but it's what we
Yeah.
love, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But Paul knows if I'm talking to you about cars, don't listen to me. I don't know anything. If hobbits
Yeah.
and elves, if you told me hobbits and elves make my cars go, I'd be like, all right, awesome. Fix the hobbits and elves. Um, So I find that in the Odyssey, it feels similar to Hamlet in that who to believe is treacherously difficult, and the answer usually is
Yeah.
not Odysseus. But
Hmm.
um, Alcinous near the end, it's line 289 in the Emily Wilson says
Yeah.
to Odysseus, "Just one of those things my daughter did was not correct. She should have
Yeah.
brought you here to us herself, escorted by her slave girls, since you had supplicated first to her." Alcinous is again going by the rules, doing the right thing.
Hmm.
So Odysseus, with careful tact, replied, "Your daughter's quite wonderful, great king. Please do not blame her. She told me to come here with her slaves, but I was too embarrassed and nervous.
Yeah.
Oh, you might
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
annoyed at seeing me. We humans on this earth are apt to be suspicious."
Yeah.
So I just think of like Odysseus's first spoken words in book 5 are when Calypso tells him she's going to let him leave.
Yeah.
And he basically says, "I don't believe you. You're trapping me."
Right.
Because of what he's been through, he's suspicious of anything that resembles good news.
Hmm.
But here, I feel like that hard outer shell that war has created is beginning to crumble just a little bit. I was too
Huh.
embarrassed and nervous. That's a
Huh.
hard thing for anybody to say, and he's saying it to a stranger.
Yeah.
And then he
Yeah.
philosophizes and kind of does a Hamlet. And once it gets personal, he philosophizes. Says, "Oh, this is how humans are."
Yes. Yes.
Whether
We're
it's his
all
nobler in
plagued
the
by it.
mind to suffer the slings and arrows, like he just starts riffing, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't know. I find that there's a little crack in the surface, a little hint
Interesting.
of one.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
I just found that interesting. And the other thing is, like he's like you said, he's about to tell his long story, so
Right.
he has to figure out a way to be open and honest and to establish credibility with people he met a few minutes ago.
Yes.
So
Yes.
maybe a little vulnerability is the way to do that. So he might even have an agenda in his vulnerability. I'm not sure.
Well, it could be, which is back to your point of who to believe and what exactly to believe.
Right.
It's pretty tough with, I don't know. I come out trusting him in the end, and if you follow him, well, I was going to say you'd get home, except for all his shipmates don't make it.
Yeah.
None of his shipmates make it home. Um,
Yeah. 0 out of like 500. So yeah, they're good.
okay. Other than that,
0%. Yeah.
other than that, everything's okay.
Yeah.
Somehow you get okay. He gets home by,
Yeah. He
by
does.
following him in the end,
Yeah.
but you never know. I don't know. I guess what I'm saying, the tension of I find him trustworthy, although I know that he's lying most of the time. So in this, it's a weird thing to say, but you're right. I don't know if it's true vulnerability. However, we will see some more moments, and actually in the next book, there's a colossal moment of this
Yes.
vulnerability
Yes.
that I think is real. It's difficult to read as
Yep.
otherwise. So I think this genuineness and to that thing about who to believe. If we're wondering about how he comes across and is he believable or not, one of the things writers do is to have other characters react to him. So
Yes.
if we take these other characters' reactions to them, they're not fools. Um, they treat him respectfully. They treat him as if he's genuine.
Mhm.
So yeah, it is a nice little moment. And there's a few of these in this, and there's another one in that next chapter I'm thinking of that I'm sure we'll talk about. That's just a beautiful little moment.
Yeah. So what about lingering questions, Paul? I have one.
Yeah.
What do you have for a lingering
Yeah.
something you're
Well,
wondering about?
yeah, I wonder about, and you sort of touched on this on your core on the tension part, the first part of that, in the beauty and the stability of the place. It's striking, the description of the description of the kingdom here, where the Phaeacians live. And Thucydides, I looked this up. I guess Thucydides, the historian, identified this place with Corfu, which is a beautiful island off the west coast of Greece. Not that I've been there, but it looks like a beautiful place, and it's described as that. Um, and so it's unbelievably almost perfect. It's almost too good. And in fact, after Athena leads Odysseus through from the shore up to the manor house, up to the palace, she takes off and leaves Odysseus there. He just stands and stares. He just stands and
Yeah.
stares and looks around. So the thing that that the story sort of points the camera at, makes you look at everything around, makes you look at the place, and it's fantastic and overwhelming. And then you meet the people, you get a hint of what the king and queen are going to be like from Nausicaa, who's fantastic and possibly good, and her parents are amazing as well. And so I guess my lingering question for this is there's a juxtaposition, and you kind of said this, I think, Jay, a juxtaposition of two ideal locations of very different kinds. One is Ogygia, where Calypso, a goddess, entices Odysseus with immortality and her immortal beauty, and continuing beauty forever, anything that he wants for the rest of his life. And then juxtaposed right up against it is not immortal enticement or immortal beauty, but mortal. The mortal version of it. This is a perfect, a utopian town with with rulers and good people who are fantastically good, who love you too. So I guess my lingering question is, what is the meaning of this? How how purposeful is this? To introduce Odysseus with these two grand temptations, one by the gods and one by other humans, and in both of them he drives straight through them, and pushes on tactfully, but pushes on through them. I think it's significant, but I also it's one of those things I kind of like to let lie a little bit too.
Yeah, I have to think about that more. I can't help but to wonder that the palpable signs of whether a military commander and king like Odysseus are successful, the palpable signs will not be there, as we just alluded to. 0 of his men survive. So part of me wonders whether Odysseus's somewhat new kind of heroism over time might be his resistance to these very, very real temptations. That his mission precedes everything else, even things that seem incredibly heavenly and enticing. Maybe that's part of a thought attached to what you're saying, but I have to think about that more.
Yeah, it's true. It might attach to that concept of the heroic, of what's truly heroic in this about him in the end.
And it would be very Odyssean in that his kind of, he wasn't known as a really great military man, right? He wasn't an Achilles, but he was a strategist. So wouldn't it make sense that his brand of heroism is one of making a thought and making a choice based on a thought?
Yeah.
Letting your, in a sense, he definitely is, it's not like he doesn't have passions, but he knows above and beyond everything else, he needs to make it home. So like no other worldly temptation can get in the way of that. Maybe his heroism is a particular kind of virtue rather than simply I kill people really effectively.
Yeah, it is different than that. He says it in this chapter, and he said it before. In my heart, I never gave in to Calypso. In his body, he did, but in his heart, he didn't. So there was this connection to the plan, to what's actually in his heart, and then his ability to get it. I think a lot of us feel like a difference between the life we're living, maybe, and what's in our heart. In some ways, to live, and we don't feel like we can match those two up. And so you can get what's heroic about being able to realize those two things, have the inside and the outside match. It's fantastic.
And you could see, and I think we do this, how naturally what you and I are talking about. And I would never want a whole class to talk about just that idea, because I want to acknowledge the existence of the fact of a poem. Yeah. But you can see how easily these very real things that kids think about can be inspired to be thought about by reading this. In other words, like, do my insides and outsides match? Do what I say I want and what I do match?
Yes.
Like, I want to be a really good student and get all A's. Do I behave that way? Like, I want people to think this of me. So you could this book is just such a wonderful conduit for really important conversations for young people. So I think
it is. And I think it's kind of, it's done a lot now where students talk about identity in lots of different ways. Yeah. And I don't think all of our identity talk is all that, is all that penetrating. A lot of times it's just, like a lot of things in school, it's kind of made for kids. But this isn't. This
Yeah.
invites you into whatever discussion about identity you want, and I think you can go about as far
Mhm.
as you'd like to go with
Yep.
this because it's on the table.
Yeah.
Here in really important ways. It's not trying to skirt it at
Right.
all. So if you are trying to figure out, if you're trying to connect with students, this is a really powerful way to do it.
Yeah.
Telemachus is completely on the table, and even old man Odysseus,
Yep.
it's still, it's still on the bubble here throughout the story, right up until the end, till it's sort of locked in. So yeah, I think you're right. That's
Yeah.
a nice, it
That's
offers some nice
good.
things like that. Yeah.
My lingering question is very
Right.
politically correct, and I did that in honor of you
Oh, good.
because I know for
I
those who don't know
require
Mr.
that.
Kelly, he's nothing if not politically correct. Um, I am actually fascinated by the role of women in this passage. So hear me out.
Okay.
Any teacher, Paul and I will tell you, we spend and have spent an inordinate amount of time
Yeah.
wrestling with the notion of representation in any reading
Mhm.
curriculum. And to be honest,
Right.
that's not
Right.
really crazy
No.
because any reader of imaginative literature will tell you that it's good to both see ourselves in what we read.
Mm-hmm.
We've done this today with the Odyssey.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And enter like very new spaces as well. You want to meet complete strangers and yourself all the time.
Yes. Yes.
And really often traditionally canonical texts like the Odyssey are put into these like superficially designated like patriarchal boxes or white
Right.
male boxes or whatever. And I think book
Yeah. Yeah.
7 reminds us that this is a really complicated text, and it's complicated in a
Mm.
lot of ways. And one of the ways it's complicated is in terms of gender. Now, I don't think it's a woke 2023 enlightened in terms of gender text.
Right.
However, issue of power relationships in the Odyssey is really complicated. So
Ooh.
the world of 3,000 years ago, it isn't a place any of us should ever want to live in, ever. But even as a rich person, like anybody with a conscience would have a hard time lasting a couple of after the first feast. I like the first
Right.
feast. The wine's probably good. The barbecue, amazing. Although it seems
Right.
like they overcook their meat, but that's a separate podcast. Burnt thigh bones. I have no interest in that.
Yeah. I don't know. What is the deal with that?
That's a whole separate. We need to have people. Guy Fieri needs to be a guest. But anyway, I think Homer presents us with a much more nuanced world in
Yeah.
that we have earlier, or should I say later, we're going to meet like characters like Circe and we met Calypso.
Yes.
There are several women who help Odysseus at the key times of his journey: Arete, Nausicaa, Circe, Calypso.
Yes.
We have a female god advising and then shielding Odysseus in mist, a queen
Right.
holding the main influence in the kingdom, told very explicitly, like, don't go to my dad, go to my mom. I mean,
Right.
any neighborhood you grew up in, you could aggravate dads and you get over it quickly. But if you upset someone's mom, the lights went out bad.
Yeah. You're cut off. Yeah.
Yep. That's just a human reality. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm cool with saying Odysseus is the complicated hero of the poem, but I think book 7 shows that like all the poems really complicated, influential, and nuanced characters. I would say most of them are women.
Yeah.
I mean, one of them is Odysseus, clearly, but the women are kind of interesting. So this is why I don't like whitewashing the
Yeah.
Odyssey under the adjective patriarchal or under the adjective canonical or under the adjective, not woke or whatever.
Yeah.
I think it's a really complicated book that honors its own complexity, and that includes in terms of gender.
Oh my goodness. I mean, and I would put at the top of the list Penelope.
Yeah.
Penelope and Odysseus are not just married. They're not simply spouses. They
Mm.
are a pair. I mean, she is I've presented, and this is getting way ahead of ourselves, and we'll talk about this when we get there, but I think she might be the only one who's a match for Odysseus in the end.
Yeah.
And that might sound like unbelievable or something, but wait till we get
Yep.
there and see what she does.
Right.
She's fantastically complex, and part of her complexity is that in a way she's kind of absent. You vastly underestimate her
Yeah.
throughout the entire book, while being told through the whole book, don't underestimate, through the story of Agamemnon, who underestimates his own wife and pays the ultimate price for it.
Yep.
Don't underestimate her. And it's funny, as a reader, you will do it. You'll do it the
Mhm.
first 5 times you read this book if someone doesn't point it out to you. And so I totally agree, and I think there's something for us in here, to look again and not again to pay attention, pay more close attention. Um, the relationships between males and females that are actually represented in these books are really different than sort of a swipe you might take at this book.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's way more to it, and I think it probably, and I'm guessing, I'm not an expert, but I think it's probably more reflective of reality in that I don't know if the human race would have survived
Yeah.
if men and women did not figure out how to work together, to collaborate together,
Sure.
to stave off, as Odysseus says, the pain and the suffering of life. I don't think we would, we would be here if one if one sex set themselves up, to rule the other. I just don't think it would work.
Yeah, and I think connecting to that, that's a good point. I think it was the previous chapter where you have this beautiful girl who clearly likes Odysseus, and
Yeah,
Odysseus is on the beach, kind of needing the beautiful girl to get him to the
right.
next step. But Odysseus saying there is nothing, like basically telling her, "I'm not your guy," but saying, "I really want this for you." There's nothing better than when a man and a woman have one mind, homo sophrene. That
Yeah.
that's Odysseus's way of saying, I think, what you just said, which is, I need to get home to my wife with whom I have that.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
anybody that puts this book in that sort of patriarchal box, is it 3,000 years old and is going to have some things that make certain people uncomfortable? Well, it
Yes.
should, because a lot of innocent people die in this book, so that should
Yeah.
make you really uncomfortable,
Right.
actually.
That's
Before
sad. That's
before any
awful.
gender politics make you uncomfortable, innocent dead people should make you uncomfortable, in my
Right.
opinion.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of just really surprising moments where women have incredible agency. I would also say Eurycleia is in that group. A literal piece of property is
Right.
in that group, who says incredibly gutsy things to people that literally own her, like she's a
Right.
microwave oven or a car. Like,
Right.
so I don't know. This book is full of these like really surprising power dynamics.
And,
It's
and
not
she's
as
way
easy
more.
as
And she's
fully.
in the middle of that. She is. Yeah, she's way more than that. She's way more. Again, that gloss of, yes, people are owned in this book, like Eurycleia, but that is not the sum total of her story
Right,
either. It's
right.
just not. I mean,
And
listen
that's
to
not
her.
just you and I talking, that's Homer writing that.
Yes, that's
Right.
exactly right. That's
You know?
exactly right. So it makes you take another look,
Mhm.
at that, and at her, and at her story, and it doesn't let you off so easily. I think is another way of putting it.
Mhm.
You're not let off the hook that easily, to
Yeah.
just say, oh, we just have a slave over here, or oh, we have a woman here. She's just sewing. They say the Phoenician women are good at sewing or whatever. Yeah, okay, great,
Yeah.
but that's not the full story. Look at the queen who
Sure.
judges. I mean, she's said to be wise. She judges and sorts out all the problems in the kingdom.
Yeah.
She's the one who has the reliable
Exactly.
wisdom. I
It's
mean,
it,
the men make the boats, but I don't know. They're just boat builders. That's not
right.
exactly
I
setting the world
agree
on
with
fire.
you. I think it's incredibly dangerous to look at Penelope and the rest of the women as a bunch of glorified ancient Greek June cleavers. I think it's a misreading.
Yes, well said.
It's a lovely toga, Mrs. Cleaver.
Why, thank you, Eddie.
All
Lovely
right,
token.
so I hope someone who's at least 75 is watching this, because this moment is for you.
Yes. No, it's true. It's true. You can't bring our contemporary, endless
No,
battles over this stuff, and it's fine.
no.
Every culture does it, I'm sure, but you can't bring that and impose that
Yeah,
back on this past story and really do justice. You can learn a whole lot more by opening yourself up, and I think that's the thing.
yep,
That's the thing. Those are the kinds of books I know you and I like best, are the ones that give us those opportunities, to really challenge our students, like you said, to meet something you recognize and then meet something you don't recognize at all, and maybe something that surprises you a ton because you think you know
yeah,
it, you think you're meeting, the cleavers, and it's just not. And in
yeah.
Clytemnestra's case, it's a whole different cleaver. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good, Paul.
You like that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
Well, all right. That might be a good note to end on. Does that cover it, Jay? Is that enough?
It's a good point to cut off our conversation, Paul.
Chop chop. So, all right. Well, that was really nice. That's what's the chapter title in the Emily Wilson's translation there?
For book 7,
Yeah.
A Magical Kingdom.
Wow.
When you wish upon a
Magical
star.
Kingdom. Come on, Emily. I don't know if I like that. This one is weird. Gardens and firelight. Um, Strange two things to choose, I suppose. I mean, it is interesting to have this lighting system, throughout
Yeah.
the kingdom, a little pine pitch, and then there's a beautiful big acreage, of gardens and
Yep.
whatever. But I don't know. Anyway, next chapter I've got is called "Songs of the Harper." Songs of the Harper, book
Yeah,
8.
that's interesting. Mine is Songs of a Poet, which is somewhat
Yeah,
of a effortless title. Like, yeah,
yeah,
that's what it is, literally.
right, right. That's
I am fascinated by book 8. Love book
really,
8. Yeah. Yeah.
really
Book
okay.
9, books 9 to 12 get all the ink, but book 8 is some important stuff in there, I think.
There are some memorable moments in it, and
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to going through this. All right, so join us again. We'll get episode for book 8 out here soon, but this is book 7, a good walkthrough, an important book. Don't skip it. Don't skip it. Read through it with your students. Listen
Mm.
to them talk about it too. Make them read it, and then listen to them talk about it, and see if you both aren't drawn into it more and more, like Jay and I have been. All
Mm.
right. Um, Thanks, Jay. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, yeah. See you next time.